It's a great pleasure to welcome to What's Next Mohammed Shaikh, who's the partner in assurance services, audit and assurance at Deloitte Africa. It's a great privilege to have him with us. He's got more than 18 years of diverse experience at Deloitte, and he's built a career spanning audit, assurance, tax, legal, consulting, and as a partner and in the media and entertainment sector lead for Deloitte Africa, Mohammed plays a pivotal role in helping clients really navigate the evolving challenges and opportunities within the technology, media, and telecommunications industry. And we know how complex it is. Mohammed, it's just such an honor to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Aki. It's an honor to be with you and talking to you today.
Listen, it's a subject I'm very passionate about, being in the industry and having spent my entire life in the media industry. And I've seen such an amazing evolution of this industry. You know, just going from a traditional way of what came out of a speaker on a radio. Today, you've got streaming, you've got, paid for services. Really the media landscape has shifted, extraordinarily compared to what we have seen in the last 2 decades. And the landscape of media consumption is also interesting. I mean, Africa's streaming landscape has changed significantly. We've seen players come and go. We've seen dominant players really coming into this market over the past decade. How would you describe, and you've got this experience as well, how would you describe this evolution of media consumption from 10 years ago to where it is today? And I guess that internet speeds have played a great influence in this place we find ourselves today. How do you see it?
Thanks, Aki. Great question. And I'm passionate about media just like you. And if I had to sum it up, my headline would be, I think streaming is at a crossroad, right? It's either they're going to redesign yesterday's model or reinvent for tomorrow. But if you take a step back and you go back in history, streaming disrupted pay TV after a number of decades, and it feels as if streaming video is about to be disrupted again. And I think if you look back, I think every telco company around the world tried to create a streaming video service, and they all kind of closed shop. And I think because it's an expensive business to be in, especially in terms of producing content, I think streaming is a volume game, if you had to sum it up, right? I mean, you got to get the volumes because the price point for streaming is much cheaper than pay TV, right? However, with that, the cost of acquiring a customer is also much more expensive. And the cost to reacquire a customer is, again, more expensive. And you've given the customer the liberty to cancel and subscribe at their convenience, which makes the business model quite volatile. So that subscribe, unsubscribe cycle, as well as customer coming on and leaving your platform, has resulted in the business model, I think, not being stable enough for companies from a profitability perspective. In addition to that, I think we've seen global players come onto the African continent. We've also seen our own companies kind of developing their own kind of streaming service. So pay TV companies have developed their own streaming services. You've got production studios or media houses developing their own direct-to-consumer offerings. You've got the likes of the F1 Grand Prix developing their own direct-to-consumer streaming service, and then you've got these global players. So I think it's quite a busy market with a lot of people playing in the space, and everyone's trying to get the attention of the consumer. In this landscape where it's where consumers can move between subscriptions, I think it makes it quite difficult. So I think companies are doing different things, but I think it's evolved significantly over the years, and I think we're seeing kind of consolidation happen. We're seeing obviously Canal Plus wanting to buy MultiChoice. We've seen Comcast kind of unbundling US in terms of their NBC Universal business. We just saw DAZN now is a sports streaming service buying Foxtel in Australia. So I think consolidation will happen simply because I don't think it's a sustainable business model in the long term for many out there.
Yeah. No, look, there's a plethora of choices, I guess, Mohammed, and for me, it's about balancing that affordability. You say it's an expensive business, and of course, it's the choice that we have as consumers. I was talking to some friends the other day, and we were saying that, there's so much to choose from, and we're back to square one with multi-choice, where you had everything in one bundle. Now you got to buy a piece of this and a piece of that and a piece of that to make that bundle, and it's becoming very complex. And with growing global and local streaming platforms entering this African market, I guess affordability and choice have become critical issues. How can media and entertainment companies navigate this balance to attract and retain subscribers?
That's a wonderful question. So if you look at it globally, if you increase the price of your streaming service, customers are more likely to cancel their subscription. Then if you look at kind of pay TV, and if you look at pay TV versus streaming, considering that streaming is at a price point of 1/6 of pay TV, from the streaming companies are exploring using the pay TV business model, right? Where they're offering bundling choices, they're offering contracts, etc. But that may not be the right choice because it's a different business model. I think if you look at it globally versus Africa, a very different story. So a US customer, for example, from a streaming perspective, on average holds 4 subscriptions and spends $61 a month. Now, that may be likened to an African consumer at the higher LSM who may have a number of subscriptions. But I mean, I was listening to the radio recently, and in terms of an individual on the higher LSM budgeting, they had the realization at the start of the year in their budgeting process that they have a number of subscriptions that they aren't actually using, and they're spending money on it, and they decided, hey, I'm going to cancel this one, I'm going to cancel that one, simply because I'm not using it, right? On the other side of the spectrum, you've got the mass consumer from a Africa perspective that can't really afford streaming subscription.
So, Mohammed, out of interest, you said in the US, the average consumer has got 4 paid services. Out of interest, how many do you have in South Africa?
I've got 3 that I can count. So I've got a DSTV, I've got a Showmax, and I've got so actually you can count it as 4. I've got a DSTV subscription, I've got Showmax, I've got Disney, and I've got Netflix. So you can actually make it 4.
And are you using all of them?
I'm not using personally all of them. I think my kids kind of stick to one platform, my wife to another platform. And being a sports fan, I spend most of my time, I think, on DSTV stream, kind of watching my favorite football.
And it's quite interesting, the more these streaming services are starting to acquire the licenses to stream sport. I wonder how that's going to change in the next few years. Now, the role of local content, and in particular African stories, they resonate with people. And I guess that when you look at that and you look at how, and I just look at some of the contents on Netflix, for example, that, people appreciate that local content and the demand for locally produced content. How do companies leverage this trend to appeal to African audiences and position African content on the global stage? And I see that many times on Netflix, the number one trending thing that people are watching is a locally produced production and local content, which is fantastic to see.
Absolutely. And you've got to ask yourself why, Aki. So why is local content so popular, and why does it pitch up as the top recommendations of the most watched shows? It's because people like to watch something that they can align to, both from a values perspective, an identity perspective, a culture perspective, a language perspective. And hence, I think the local players invest significantly into local content. And global players like Netflix have realized that to grow subscribers in a particular region or continent, they would need to invest in local content, because people like to watch shows that they can relate to. And I think it's got to do a lot with, you want to watch someone that you can relate to because of who you are, versus international content, which is, I guess, made for the entire world.
That's a very interesting way of putting it, but that costs a lot of money. And as you say, with streaming services, you say it's an expensive business. This is exactly what you mean, because there's massive investment that has to happen to do that local production, because that's not cheap. But I do see they're starting to return. They see a return on investment. I mean, with my Greek background, there's Maestro in Blue, which is a production on Netflix that was designed for the Greek market, for example. And I see how popular it's gone global. So they do have some of those, some of those hits that go global. And of course, there's the one from South Korea. I'm trying to think of the name of it right now. It just slipped my mind. But the point is that you can create that local platform and use it across other different platforms globally. But competing with social media platforms is always a challenge, because I find myself spending a lot of time on YouTube, for example. And I don't know what you classify YouTube as, but I see it as a social media platform. Of course, there's competition from the likes of TikTok and Instagram, for example, for people's attention and their eyes. And social media platforms offering free user-generated content, it's a big thing. We see what TikTok has done, and they've become a formidable competitor to traditional streaming services. In fact, you look at some of the content that's been created, it's like almost like mini-series on some of these social media platforms. How should streaming platforms respond to this challenge to maintain relevance and market share? Because I guess that they're eating away at some portion of their market share. They must be.
Yeah, so Aki, whenever I talk to any pay TV or any media executive, I now start to tell them that, do you know that you're directly competing with social media? And more often than not, I get a big surprise, because they don't actually see them as a competitor. But I think you are spot on. So if you look at the data from a survey that we've done globally, close to half of Gen Zs and 30% of millennials will choose social media and social media simply because it's free, right? It's convenient, endless scrolling, and the algorithms serve you up personalized content based on your own interests, right? And short form videos created by influencers or creators, and if consumers are spending time on social media, it means that they're spending less time on a streaming video service, right? So I think from that perspective, and then the second thing is, more than half of consumers we surveyed globally say that they spend half their time on streaming services searching for the right show, versus social media, where they don't actually need to search for anything. It serves them up exactly what they want based on the algorithms that know who they are and what their interests are.
It's very interesting what you say, because it's so true that you're saying that these are competitors to these massive platforms. But of course, the power of fandom and communities shouldn't be underestimated, right? Because you look at that and how massive some of these communities are. Can you elaborate on how fostering fan communities could actually help platforms gain a competitive edge in Africa? And I see some of these communities have got millions of users, and I think that's a competitive advantage.
So I believe that if media companies can create super fans, right, they will be quite successful. And what I mean by super fans, if you look at social media and if you look at content creators or even influencers, they are able to kind of develop such a followership based on who they are and developing that community around them. Because I think everyone wants that sense of belonging and that sense of community, right? If you look at, I'm a Spurs fan from English Premier League, right? And Spurs can win or lose, right? Spurs can lose every week, yet I follow Spurs.
My heart goes out to you. My heart goes out to you, Mohammed. Shame what you've been through the last few years. I'm sorry about that.
Absolutely, but I've been a fan since childhood, right? So win or lose, week in, week out, it doesn't matter to me as a fan, because I will still be a diehard supporter for Spurs. And it's because I feel that sense of belonging with them. Similarly with other fans, right? And it's developing that sense of belonging and community and superfans becomes quite key, I think, for media companies to learn from social media and sports teams in terms of how they've been able to develop that loyalty from that individual. And that loyalty is what I kind of call a super fan. I think together with that, I think media companies can learn a lot from influencers and creators on social media, and perhaps maybe partnering with them, right, to take the experience from social media into streaming and back to social media. So we almost create this tapestry of an experience from a consumer perspective.
Look, I'm an Aston Villa fan, so I can relate to what you've been going through all these years. So don't feel too bad. No, that's so interesting to talk about that in these big groups, and people are very loyal, as you said, as you are and I am. We're loyal to our team, through thick and thin. And of course, the other thing is those innovative partnerships that are out there, and strategic partnerships with telcos we've seen. Who would have thought telcos and banks, for example, would be selling, streaming services and buying subscriptions? They're emerging as a solution to affordability challenges because they now have access to the finances and they can bridge the two together. How do streaming platforms and their partners structure these collaborations that ensure mutual beneficial and long-term consumer engagement? And we've seen some win-wins, haven't we?
Absolutely. So I think initially, as I mentioned before, we saw kind of telcos kind of create their own streaming services platform and then switch it off based on the cost. We've spoken now about social media and the need for media companies and streaming media companies to kind of form these partnerships with content creators and influencers to enhance their own value proposition. Similarly, I think from a partnership perspective, I think streaming services need to form a mutually beneficial partnership with telcos and banks. And I see that as a great opportunity for them for the simple reason is that a telco, for example, is sitting on the data and a consumer, and you've got a media company that has the content. Similarly, a bank is sitting with an individual and a number of customers around on their platform that they can offer a more kind of a value-added service. The tricky part, Aki, is who owns that consumer, right? And who owns the data for that consumer? And up to now, I don't think we've seen that mutually beneficial partnership come to life because I think everybody wants to hold onto their own data for their own consumer. And the minute we find that there is this way to kind of create this mutually beneficial partnership, I think it's quite a meaningful value proposition to take to market. And I think media companies and their partners, I think, would equally benefit.
It's such an interesting discussion we're having, Mohammed, and I'm glad I'm speaking to someone who is as positive and passionate about it. And we've seen all these disruptions, right? I mean, we know what Netflix did to the traditional video rental market. And they in turn disrupted, the likes of the cable TV providers like DSTV, for example. Do you think that we'll get to a point and going forward, and I'm asking the impossible now to put your forward-thinking hat on to say, where is it all going? Is it a possibility that somebody like Netflix will be interrupted or disrupted in the same way that they disrupted the video market, more than a decade ago to get to where they are today? And we've seen it. I mean, you would have thought companies like BlackBerry, for example, were untouchable. Look what happened to them. So do you think that in a decade from now, we'll be looking at this market very differently? I mean, where do you see it all going, Mohammed?
I mean, it could go various ways. I think you're right. I think no streaming company executive should be comfortable in terms of kind of where they are, simply based on where we've come from. I think from a disruption perspective, I think social media does present a significant disruption. We've spoken about consolidation earlier on, and I think that consolidation could happen just to drive profitability for investors and the market. And I think that's an important consideration in terms of how companies are measured today. But overall, I think it's an interesting space to watch. Where it ends up, I'm not even sure, but I think that's what makes this industry so exciting, right?
Absolutely.
Is because you've got so many competing priorities for different partners even in this. So I could be selling content to Aki today, and I could be developing my own direct-to-consumer offering to compete with Aki tomorrow, right? And I think that's what makes this place so interesting. And I think it's even more interesting for the consumer because we live in a world of choice, and as consumers, we love the choice, and we love to be at the center of that choice versus kind of being told what to do.
Absolutely fascinating. Mohammed, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. Mohammed Shaikh, who is a partner in assurance services, audit, and you've got quite a portfolio. I wish we could chat more and unpack the other stuff that you do, but I'm sure we'll do that in the future. But you look at audit, you look at assurance, you look at all sorts of things at Deloitte Africa. But for this one, we spoke about media and the entertainment sector lead for Africa. And wow, what a fascinating place! And I'm pretty sure that as more people come online for the first time and those internet speeds increase and the affordability of data decreases, we're just going to see a massive uptake of these services that we're talking about. Mohammed, what a pleasure it was speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time.